Control is dead, and so am I.
Next on Eternal Durdles. Before we get started, I want to give a quick thanks and appreciation out there to all the Durdle Maniacs that support us on Patreon. Without these people, the podcast could not afford the production upgrades and time we devote to it. If you appreciate the content we create, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/EternalDurdles. Now on to the show. Hello and welcome to Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Blackman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Zach, Control is dead, and it's not me just saying that. That's based on the stats. Let's get into the metagame, my guy, because Brainstorm Control is nowhere to be found. Nowhere to be found.
We need one of those like Nietzsche t-shirts. It's like Force of Phil, Control is dead. Control, Force of Phil is dead.
I mean, that's how I feel. That is how I feel. We're gonna do a little metagame breakdown before we get a ban announcement. Yeah. We're recording this before the ban announcement happens on the 16th, right?
Yes, it should be on the 16th. This is the Ides of October. We're recording this.
The Ides of October. We're going to get a ban announcement. Nothing is going to change. And what that means is that this is the metagame that we're going to get going into Eternal Weekend, barring any changes from the Commander product. If you want to see the biggest change that's probably going to come out of that, tune into last episode where we talked to Fenris Cloud about Infect, and that seems like a deck that's going to do well given the new Legalist's Quick Reflexes card.
Very close to pivoting to Infect for Eternal Weekend after having that conversation.
Bro,
honestly, watch this video, then go check out. I'm going to include it at the very end to remind you check out the Fenris Cloud interview I had, and I feel like what a violently powerful deck now with the Legalist Quick Reflexes.
Bro, you're thinking about going to Infect for Eternal Weekend? So am I, dude.
That's wild.
Because Control is non-existent in this metagame. We're looking at the Legacy metagame over the last 3 months on MTG Goldfish, and the top 15 decks. We're just going to give a breakdown.
Yeah.
Days Wasteland, Wasteland combo, Wasteland combo, stacks, combo, stacks, combo, Days Wasteland, 8 cast, combo, Maverick. That's it. That's your metagame.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing is, so the decks that we generally tend to, I think of as seeing when I go to Legacy tournaments, right? Delver, you're going to run into Delver constantly. Delver's there as Grixis Tempo, apparently. And then Death Shadow. But 8 cast is a deck that I play, and I feel like I see represented pretty well. And for the last 90 days, it's at a 2.6%. I feel like I run into 8 cast way more often than that. But that, that's all. What's the word I'm looking for? Biographical data or whatever. It's autobiographical. What do they call that?
Autobiographical? Are you anecdotal?
Anecdotal. Thank you. Yeah. Anecdotal. It's also autobiographical, right?
A little anecdotal.
Anecdotal evidence. Yeah. It's interesting to look at this. Looking at these like the top 15 decks they show on the first page. Storm is nowhere to be found. And I think that should inform your sideboard choices a little bit.
I was going to say, the thing that strikes me as interesting is Beseech the Mirror is nowhere to be found.
Right? Yeah. Beseech the Mirror, all the rage 2 months ago. One of our best videos, organically was our Beseech the Mirror, me just tackling that card for 5 minutes. And nowhere to be found in this top 15 of decks.
Yeah, we should also reference that this is the top metagame for tabletop, not for Moto. So if you're watching this going, that's crazy, Moto is full of that stuff, leagues are nonstop everything. This is the tabletop metagame, and we're talking about that because that's what Eternal Weekend is going to be.
Yeah, I think that point behooves us to mention that, obviously you can say what you want about the Moto metagame, but that's not what people are going to be bringing to Eternal Weekend, right?
Dude, when you go to Eternal Weekend, here's my sense of every time there's a paper event, you always have to slightly over-index for lands. You always have to slightly over-index for D&T. The players that have the fully foiled, Japanese signed versions of their deck that they've been playing for a decade and a half, they're going to play those decks. So they'll make adjustments as they can to like those versions of their build, but like they will play those decks. So like the Lance players are the Lance players, and the D&T players are the D&T players. I mean, the Miracle guy is the Miracle guy. You're going to run into people's pet decks that they've been playing forever, and they'll be proficient with their decks, and that may not necessarily correlate to like the fact that Moto can change, your deck based on your subscription that you have each month.
Yeah.
So you got to like take that into account.
Yeah, I mean, I think where I'm talking about, maybe I'll switch to Infect or whatnot. I am, sort of jailed by the cards that I own. I can play Death Shadow, I can play 8 Cast, no problem. I can choose those decks right out of the gate. But if I want to play Infect, I'm going to have to borrow Trops, which is, that's 4 Trops is a lot to ask, and maybe a Savannah too. 4 Trops is a lot to ask for a weekend where everyone's going to be playing their cards, right? And like classic example, I was like, hey, I know a lot of people in the community. I'll start with the person I know generally doesn't play Trops. Turns out you want to play Infect too, so.
Well, here's the thing: I'm not necessarily married to it yet. I just recognize that, like, in order to do well, sometimes you have to like recognize that your pet deck is tier 6. And listening to you and Fenris Cloud last week. I mean, you made a really strong point for how Legalist's quick reflexes being like this new hotness that people are not going to be able to learn how to navigate. People are not necessarily up to date with how to navigate against Infect, so you'll probably get some, not brewer's advantage, but like the advantage of people being inexperienced with it, right? Yeah. It's not at the top of mind. And like if people are trying to remember and figure out how to do it in the middle of the game, also never having played against Legalist's quick reflexes before, then maybe it's actually a really good choice. I imagine that a lot of players that are in a similar space, like Cephalid Breakfast is still the 8th most popular deck in paper, according to Goldfish, but Cephalid Breakfast has like sort of waxed into like this more aggressive combo slant in the new metagame, given that it's not an initiative metagame where they're not playing as much removal, and you can just take the initiative and like win the game that way. They've sort of moved more into like a Pact of Negation, like faster combo deck in a lot of ways. And if you're going to play the creature combo deck, I mean, yeah, that's fine. Like you can play Cephalid Breakfast and it still takes up the slots, but like now you're playing the combo deck that is both soft to creature removal and stack removal, or counter magic and discard. Like it has to plug all of these holes, as opposed to like Storm just has to like plug the stack, right? Or like deal with a hate piece post board, which they're prepared for.
I think
so. It's
within that realm also. An important thing to talk about as far as looking at the meta for a deck like that. We were talking before the cast about looking at the 7-day, looking at the 14-day, 30-day, and 90-day. Temur Delver is popping back up in the ranks, and that means there's more Stifle out there. And let me tell you what a blowout Stifle is to that deck. If someone tries to go off with their Thassa's Oracle after they Doomsday, or after they, do their Dread Return or whatever, and you're just like, Stifle. There's not a lot that they can do about that. Like, that's a card that, like, if you're seeing an uptick in Temur Delver and more Stifles are being played, the Cephalid Breakfast and Doomsday start to pile off a little bit in how effective they are.
I wonder if that, like, Stifle is a good card to quickly chat about. When people go back to playing that card and then they go through some rounds of testing, Stifle is always the card that gets cut to solve the other problems that you have. Like I think that like if people are getting onto Temur Delver now, which it seems like they are because it's the 3rd most played deck, and I'm seeing like versions with like up the Beanstalk, and they're playing a little bit more grindy mid range that way. Questing Druid is getting some acknowledgement.
Yeah, Questing Druid is the reason to splash green now.
Questing Druid is the reason to splash green. I've seen the 4 colored Delver decks that are also playing Bowmaster and Questing Druid, and so like the green splash in the main is solely to cast the Questing Druid. Otherwise, you're Grixis Delver. Yeah. So like back when they were doing Grixis Delver plus like green source for Deathrite Shaman, now they're doing Grixis Delver plus green sources for Questing Druid. And I get that like they're not the same in power level, but like they're the same in terms of your mana base.
Yeah.
Like you're making a splash for a card that you may or might not ever need in the like you may never have needed the gain life, remove a creature card for Deathless Shaman when you were playing it, but you had access to it. Same way with this deck. So like we're seeing some experimentation there. I think that like Stifle is the card that once people are testing for Eternal Weekend and recognizing their weaknesses and then needing to fill in cards to like solve those weaknesses, Stifle is always the first card to get cut because Stifle doesn't actually solve any specific thing. Like you can get people with Stifle and like when you do, it will be devastating, but like it's not actually something that where you're like, I'm going to plan to stifle these decks and that will prove to be fruitful for me, you know? So it ends up getting to be the card that like, it's always the training wheels to start, and then it gets cut over time as you like get to the tournament, and then people recognize that like Stifle, if you're not ahead, is not going to help you, and so they play a little bit more broad stroke cards that are going to help them with the metagame they expect. So like I'm not going to necessarily prepare for Stifle, so if you get me with that, like don't. But
I do love to stifle a Miracle Trigger. That was like the best part of playing Rug Delver against Miracles when they're just like, and I'll flip this Terminus over, and you're like, no thanks, you now have a Terminus in your hand.
You have a really expensive sorcerer in your hand. Yeah, good luck. Yeah.
But yeah, so I think it's looking at the metagame here. I think it's interesting to see, what is currently being played by the masses, as it were, right? What are people expecting to take to tournaments? I think it's wild to see that Death Shadow is still as high as it is, and I feel like that is like that's a nod to Grief. I feel like Grief is literally just that good that some Death Shadow decks are switching to like a sort of scam build where they're playing for reanimates and stuff.
Very specifically, that was the thing that I wanted to talk about when we got to Death Shadow. Is in paper, it says it's like Death Shadow, Delver, like those are the days, Wasteland Shells. In my mind, 0% chance that we don't get that evolution over from now until Eternal Weekend, that it doesn't just become scam.
Yeah. Like
scam is popular on Moto, and it's a little bit in paper, but people are still on like some Death Shadow builds or like like the Grixis Delver shells. Like if you go into Eternal Weekend and you're not prepared for scam, and when I say scam, I mean like Grief reanimate, cycle Troll of Khazad-dûm reanimate. Like if you're not prepared to deal with that, you won't win the tournament.
Well, here's a question I have, Phil. These decks, the Blue-Black Shadow deck, right? It's scam already, right, for the most part. But there comes a point, and I've been harping on this for a while, when if your only payoff to lose life is Death Shadow, is that the plan you want? If you own the right lands to play this without doing life damage to yourself? Because I just feel like Death Shadow's not good enough payoff anymore, And, Chalice of the Void exists, so it's getting countered on one if you're playing against a Chalice deck. They're running rampant in the format. It just feels to me like you could build a better version of this deck, remove the Death Shadows, and either make it more mid-rangey or just play Delver of Secrets in that spot. Like I said, the reason why I play Death Shadow is because I like the access that I have to playing green in it too for the Berserk. I know I've said that in like 3 consecutive casts, talked about the Berserk aspect of this deck. But if you're just playing blue-black, like I don't know if it makes sense to do all that damage to your life total just to like maybe get out an 8-8 or a 12-12 against your opponent that they can just block with whatever they have,
I think your explanation right there, if you looked at it through the lens of, there's not enough payoff for the life loss, people are like, why would I do that when I can just reanimate Troll of Khazad-dûm?
Right.
And that's it. Like, I think that's it. I think like your thought process right there is why people have been dropping off Death Shadow and moving towards Troll of Khazad-dûm and Bowmasters and Murktide and just being that deck instead. Yeah. And so your threats are, they hit a lot harder, a lot earlier in the game because you can Troll of Khazad-dûm on turn 2, holding up any number of disruption, or you can also, like, if you go turn 1, fetch, get your Underground Sea, cycle, put the Troll of Khazad-dûm in, get your land, then if you can also just go, like, play your Wasteland around days, reanimate Troll, waste you have a Troll, and you're making your second land drop, so your opponent can't waste you in that situation either. So like they're way far behind. I mean, granted, that's a line where you're on the play, but like you can't do that kind of line with Death Shadow. And I think that your thought process is why people have been moved away from Death Shadow, and that's why I'm saying that like if you aren't prepared for scam anybody who was playing Death Shadow or isn't interested in playing, the softer mana base, if you want 2 islands in a swamp in your main or whatever to like actually be able to cast spells and not have to worry about blood moons and shit, because Prison is still a deck that's in the top 8 of most played decks, then like you're just like, cool, I'll play Scam. I'll have way more interaction. I'll have both stack and hand control, similar to Death Shadow. Like, it still plays Thoughtseize, it still plays all that stuff, but like instead of playing your dinky 3/2 or your E6/6 that you can't play until turn 4 that you've lost enough life, you're like, whatever. Here's an effectively unblockable 6/5. Here's an 8/8 in the air. Here's my 3/2 that we'll just like both aggressively mulligan because I demand us to, and then you can deal with this hard to block 3/2 threat, and then you get all of these good threats out of the board between. You already have Ogre's Bowmasters in the main. One area where like Scam I have not seen evolve to yet, but it seems like it would be reasonable because a lot of decks are using their graveyard in like really meaningful ways. Like Dothy Voidwalker out of the board seems like it would be a totally reasonable inclusion in these decks that I haven't seen yet. But like a ton of decks are really abusing their graveyards, whether it's like your Uro control decks that like need Uro to stabilize in those matchups, or any of like the Beseech decks. Like if you just cut that line off, and then it's still a really aggressive threat. Like Dothy Voidwalker is still a really aggressive threat, and you also know where it's also really good: the fucking Mirror.
Yeah.
Because like if we're both trying to jockey reanimates, like I want a Dothy Voidwalker on the table. If you're on the play and you get to strip their hand of like a way to strip your Voidwalker, and then you just play your Voidwalker, it stymies a lot of their shit. Their Murktides get hassled a bunch. They can't reanimate Troll of Khazad-dûm.
Well, what can you really do at that point? Without its graveyard, Scam becomes a bad standard deck. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to slam this 6 mana 6/5 with Super Menace. No, I have a 7 mana 3/3 that I can put. No. Yeah. I mean,
there's like the metagame is still like shifting around. Like people are still experimenting. Clearly, like I saw Ozymandias talk about a 4-color control deck with Questing Druid, but it's effectively 4-color control, but playing Questing Druid as the draw spell that's incidentally a threat when you want it. And it's like, okay, like and doing well in a league, and it's like, okay, yeah, there's still some space there, right? Like there's still some maneuvering around, like learning these new cards, like what homes could they possibly fit in. They're all generically good cards, right? Like every single thing is like generically good. There is like none of this shit is synergy based. It's all individually powerful based. So it's like, okay, what's the best combination of these individually powerful cards on their own that like maximize my options to win? And like the space between now and Eternal Weekend, like people want to win Eternal Weekend, man. Like that tournament has clout. Like we don't know anything about it. Like we don't know any of the details about it. Like the communication's pretty soft. We're gonna, try and delve into that and figure that out for the
we
the
should
community
have
coming
Nick
up soon.
on this week or early next week.
Yeah. And so we'll get a little bit more details about that. But like even despite the lack of the communication about like what the tournament schedule and structure is and all that, people still care about this event. This is the one where it's like if you can win a Legacy event, it's like you want to win a Legacy Grand Prix, you want to win Eternal Weekend. And that's like the prime time for Eternal players. So like people are going to test for this event. They're going to want to do well. And there's still a lot of maneuvering to figure out like what are the best options. And one of the spaces that like I've been curious to explore now that I'm like looking at things that aren't counterbalance are, okay, the Beseech decks do really well, right? And then the Scam decks do really well, right? And I'm like, okay, well, what are the lines of like, what are the good parts of Scam that we can also then take from Mono Black Helm and put together, and like the nod to Dothy Voidwalker, if you need like your one-hit knockout punch, like I really liked the tech in Mono Black Helm of playing the one of Ill-Gotten Gains. Can you imagine just like, okay, I'm gonna board into Dothy Voidwalker Ill-Gotten Gains out of the Scam deck, and it's like, yeah, I'm bringing in my stuff to like deal with your Murktides or to draw to be able to beat the Scam draw or whatever, and you're just like, cool, dude, like combo you, right? Yeah. Like there's the options for that space. Like I'm interested in that space. Like just transform into a combo deck.
Well, Phil, I wanna. Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy, and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned. I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about, we're leading up to Eternal Weekend, but I think it's important to talk about what's coming out between now and then, right? Like The Doctor Who stuff didn't hit. There was nothing. I didn't see anything in Doctor Who that like I read as like, oh, this is going to be a Legacy thing that's going to change the way Legacy is or whatnot. Which is, I'll go on my like half rant about Universes Beyond. I love Universes Beyond when I love them, and when I'm not into them, I kind of ambivalent about it. I don't have that like visceral reaction other people do, where they're like, it's not my fandom. I hate it. I'm not a Whovian by and large. I grew up like watching a little bit of the like Tom Baker stuff, and I think it's fine. Does it fit Magic the Gathering for me specifically? I don't know. But
so you say Whovian, and the first thing that jumped into my mind was
Dr. Seuss, right?
Dr. Seuss, Whoville, yeah,
same. But for me, it's like that stuff. Like I said, that stuff is great when it hits. Lord of the Rings is a perfect example for me. It's fine when it's not. I say all that to say this, like almost nothing from Doctor Who I saw aside from some reprints that you're gonna occasionally run into a snuff out or something like that. But I didn't see anything that like I felt like could even see play in Legacy, or that like and look, someone will prove me wrong and throw some weird doppelganger card at me or something like that, or No,
I think you're right. I think that like there's the space for those cards are not playable because Legacy is unbelievably fast.
Yeah.
And all the decks are like they're based around like suspend and shit. Like the mechanics in those decks are not Legacy mechanics.
Well, that's sort of a blessing because we've had a lot of upheaval with Lord of the Rings. The last set had a lot of stuff. Obviously, we've got Questing Druid, you've got Beseech the Mirror, some other things. What Sleep Cursed Fairy or whatever is like being given the nod occasionally here and there. But
I do like those decks of Fae trying to make Flame of Anor good. Like those decks look really sweet.
Yeah.
Like I don't think that they're good enough to win an event. Like you're still playing a bunch of cards that aren't playable, but like it is cool. It is a cool space.
Yeah. So I think with the format where it is, do we we've discussed Legalist quick reflexes, but is there anything between now and December 7th through the 10th? So is there anything else that's coming out then? Is there another set coming out? There's not another set, right?
I don't believe another set is going to be legal for before EW, but other than the Commander product.
Yeah.
One card that I remember thinking, and it's probably not good enough because it's literally double the mana, but do you remember the Urza Saga Ragavan decks? Sagavan, right? Like, just like, and it was just like, I'm going to play this Ragavan. Obviously, it's busted and it's way too good, but because it pumps out artifacts, you're like, oh, okay, I'm pumping out artifacts, and that is essentially Crusades for my constructs. You remember this deck, right? Yeah. Like it was a pretty popular deck. There's a card from the Doctor Who set, and it was called Heaven Sent. It's a saga for blue and a red, and the first two chapters are Investigate. And then the third chapter is it deals 1 damage to each opponent. And then if an opponent has 0 or less life, draw 7 cards. Otherwise, exile Heaven Sent and you may cast it this turn. So effectively what it means in 1v1 is the first 2 chapters are Investigate. The third chapter deals a damage, and then you can just recast it for that turn, right? So like you forever you just keep making clue tokens every time, for whatever. And I was like, well, that is sort of in the space of what Ragavan was doing in those decks of like making Crusades. And I'm like, it's also like a super grindy card if we're in the grindy space, particularly if you can abuse the artifacts. Like I was like, maybe there's something there. Obviously I haven't tested it. It's probably too slow, but it was one of the cards where I was like, Urza Saga makes a lot of cards that look unplayable. Yeah.
I think it's important note. November 17th, Lost Caverns of Ixalan comes out, so there will be another.
Oh, so we will.
There will be another set. And let's think about cards. So they've got the flip lands from the last Ixalan that
Zach, this is my face with this is my face with new cards coming out before then, dude. Big frowny face. How are we supposed to test? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's exciting. If we don't know anything, maybe that's exciting.
I mean, I don't know how much. Let's think about how much. Like, what did Ixalan really change for Legacy? You had, Search for Azcanta, I think. No
Back then,
no planeswalkers were really playable. it's dinosaurs. It's big dinosaurs, so nobody really played anything from that. You had some nice reprints, and like Spell Pierce was like a $10 card at one point. Now it's like reprinted common into the ground, so you can get those anytime you want.
I remember there was a couple of playable pirates at the time.
Oh yeah, Pirates was the Bob Huang, right?
There were some low to the ground pirates that like I remember there was the red pirate it was a 2/1 first striker that would let you steal an instant and sorcery out of your opponent's graveyard. And like that was like playable, like depending on what the metagame looked like. Like we might see some sort of playable tricky pirate that like steals somebody's shit or whatever. Like I mean, Opposition Agent is still a 4/of in the mono black Helm deck. Like there's space for those kinds of creatures. Like if they have an impactful enough effect, and it's like I don't know. I mean, print a cheap enough thing for me to steal your Chrome Mox, and it's probably fine.
Pushing my brain back to before the first Ixalan came out. You know what I asked myself every single time a set came out, and the first time I can really think of doing this, I was severely disappointed when Gatecrash came out. You know what I always used to ask myself when a new set came out, Phil?
Why no alternative Death Shadow?
Will there be any relevant Merfolk?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so I forget the card in Gatecrash. It was like a flash 6-mana Simic 2/4 or 4/2 or something like that. And I was like, this was not what I was looking for. But
love that for you.
I think that is something to look at. Every now and again, something comes out and Merfolk gets like a little push, right?
Mm-hmm.
And True Nemesis, obviously a thing. Tide Shaper was like the last card that really come out to like push Merfolk forward a bit. Dockhand or whatever, Rashidun Dockhand. Emperor something the second was a card. All those came from the same set. They were all from Modern Horizons 2.
Oh, Emperor, there's Emperor Mikhail or whatever that was like the future site for Merfolk, but it was fucking mana gated. They mana gated it.
Yeah.
They were like, yeah, you can cast it if you pay 1, you get the thing. And it's like, what are you guys doing? Like that's the only card the only one that they're like, we got to mana gate this guy's Merfolk too strong. Come on. Gotta mana gate this one.
Well, you don't want the professor winning a tournament because then
I guess that's
then
true.
He will complete his Infinity Gauntlet, right?
Yeah. That is interesting. Like we are going to see a bunch more. Like they're going to bring the Explore mechanic back for sure. Like they've already spoiled map tokens, which is another artifact token.
Yeah.
And what else can map tokens do other than like 2-tap Explore?
Well, right? So you can explore with a map token because Explore targets the thing that Explore is on, right? I guess you could give a creature Explore, but it has to be put onto a creature.
I not necessarily like I see what you're saying. I don't mean that like
you mean exploration
it's necessarily going to a map token is just going to do functionally like look at the top card if it's a land, draw it. If not, you can put it into your graveyard or whatever.
+1/+1 counter on nothing.
But it'll just be it'll be like it could be the Explore text, and then it could put a +1. But like it's obviously going to be something in that space, right? Like what else could it possibly be? So it's like if you have a bunch of cards that also make cheap incidental artifacts to like continuously pump your Urza's Saga constructs, like all of these cards are going to make Urza Saga and Bowmaster better because those are the cards that give you all the resources to do everything with every kind of design. So like whatever we get out of this set, like Urza Saga is going to be a winner.
So I think, I'm trying to think what else like would be, and so we've got vampires, which has never really been historically a archetype you see in Legacy. Merfolk always on the fringes. Pirates, that's a thing, I guess. Dinosaurs, I don't see it, but it's all it takes is one, 2-mana 5/5 or something like that dinosaur. Or there was the Undead Regisaur thing. What was that card called? That was like a 7/7 that you could Dark Ritual out.
Regisaurus. I just know it as Reggie. Yeah.
Yeah. So that
it's a it's the 7/6 that during your upkeep you discard a card, and it was always played incorrectly in people's sideboards.
Yeah.
Like it was never good enough, but people love playing it.
So cards like that. I'm just trying to think of the flavor of Lost Caverns that anything might jump out at me, and honestly, I think if we were disappointed by the offerings for Wilds of Eldraine, I think we're on a slow down tick in terms of power level before there's another uptick. which is fine. I think we can use that lull from Lord of the Rings, where like so much changed. So much of the metagame changed.
I mean, one thing that we saw, and I don't know if it's going to be a space to make, give another boost to Ruby Storm, but they did spoil the Red God. That's a 4/4. It's a 4/4 for 4 that says like it's more or less like anytime you deal a damage, if it's not dealing 4 damage, deal 4 damage instead.
Oh,
because
yes.
It deals damage equal to its power, and it's a 4-drop. And so if you're just like, okay, I'm just going to play a couple of red rituals, play this, and then grape shot you, and then it's like, okay, well now if every grape shot instead of dealing 1 deals 4, that means that my storm needs to be 5, and
which is not hard to do if you can get three rituals, this thing, and grape shot, and the game is over.
Right. It's that if I understand how that combo works correctly, that is get to storm 5 and make 6 red mana.
Yeah.
And or make 3 red. And if you can do that, and that's a kill, that seems like okay. There's a storm deck to be had there because Ruby Storm is already already a playable deck. So like maybe there is a tool like that beyond that we're not seeing, but like that one strikes me as like that can't be that difficult to pull off in a 60. Like granted, like that one loses to like Caracas and shit, so like you have to be wary of that. But like I don't know, if you're playing Ruby Storm at a baseline and then you just throw this thing in that like quadruples your storm effectively, like okay, maybe that's good.
Pretty good.
Pretty good.
Yeah. All right. Well,
and also and Grape Shot's also good in a format where everybody's on Bowmasters, right? Like it's not embarrassing to have a couple of fork bolts in your deck randomly if people are on a bunch of X1s.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I was going to say, the Grape Shot as just a board clear, I did that several times in that tournament that we faced off at, where I was just like, pick off all your, zoo creatures or whatever, and, buy myself some turns. This Passion Flames will do the rest later on,
Zach, you had me, one thing that I wanted to chat about before we close here on our thing, when we were talking about Legalist's quick reflexes. Clearly, that card is going to have legs, and we've been talking about it pretty much only in Infect. But like, is that the Temur Delver removal spell that you've wanted this whole time?
I thought about this when I was messing around. The problem is with this card, it's so good for Infect, right? But the problem is, unless your creature has like a tap ability, you're not getting the full value out of that spell for the most part, because you want to save your creature. You're generally doing that in combat when your opponent's like, okay, I'm going to Abrupt Decay this, and you're like, okay, well, now I'll do this and untap it, and you're already attacking, so you don't get the like kill part of the spell, right? You really want to pay that all the way off. I won't say all the way off, because you're not going to get the reach out of it if you're attacking, right? But I think, so let's say I'm attacking with a Tarmogoyf, right? I'm like, okay, you know what? I'll cast this before combat, attack with my Tarmogoyf, remove your guy, or, maybe I'll put you in a situation where you have to decide if you want to keep your Tarmogoyf or not, right? That's a thing that's not happened in years, the problem is you want as little green as you can possibly have right now in your Temur Delver deck because of Questing Druid, right? You just want to have green for Questing Druid and have every other spell give him a +1/+1 counter.
Right.
So I think
so you're saying green cards are not you can't play Questing Druid. You're saying don't play Questing Druid with green cards.
Yeah, pretty much. Like it's Temur Delver because Questing Druid exists, but it's really Blue-Red Delver that like can play Questing Druid.
Here was where I was thinking that like it's tough to evaluate this card without testing it, but you know how Veil of Summer sometimes is Cryptic Command and sometimes is Silence.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that is Legolas's quick reflexes for Temur Delver, like sometimes it's protect yourself from the Leyline Binding. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's Doomblade.
Yeah, I mean,
like when you're saying, like Infect is going to be able to pay this all the way off because like, you have the means to be able to like activate your Inkmoth Nexus, and then if they fight over it, you're like, whatever, I can then do this and then tap mana and then also kill your thing. Like, yeah, Infect is definitely going to be able to like capture like all the meat off the bone on that card. But like, is that card on rate just strong enough that like, okay, if you and I are on board and we have equivalent threats, right? Like we both have a Murktide or whatever. Can you attack your Murktide into my tap Murktide if you fear Legalist's quick reflexes, because I get to untap and stand in the way, or like even the tempo of something like that, like if we're racing and we it's like Delver Murktide versus like bigger Murktide, and you attack in, it's like, okay, untap my Delver, block, and now I like swing in for lethal because we were racing. You know what I mean? Like it seems like there's a bunch of scenarios where like incidentally the card is going to be crazy good because you can't respond to it.
Yeah,
like I think we're underestimating how insane Split Second actually is. And I think that like there's a lot of space for that card to be elsewhere other than an Infect.
I'm going to push back on you a little bit on the insanity of that card outside of Infect, because the thing that makes it amazing in Infect, right? The one card in Infect that makes it the most amazing card ever is Berserk, right? In that scenario where you have a Murktide and I have a Murktide, and let's say they're equal strength, and then I go to attack and it kills your Murktide, that's wonderful. Like, obviously I'm getting through with 7 damage or whatever. But in a scenario where maybe you have a bigger Murktide than me, it doesn't kill your Murktide. If I had played Berserk too, I'm basically dealing quadruple damage with my Berserk, right? Because you have to block with whatever. Or I'm outright, if I'm doing it before combat, then I'm killing your Murktide and getting through with all of my damage. I think the addition of Trample, if we see Trample threats in other decks that like can make use of Legolas quick reflexes, I think that's where that card shines. I think the idea of having Trample and basically just, especially in Infect where like you're dealing -1 tokens instead of damage to things. So it's not only like, is it maybe killing the guy, but if it's not, it's lowering the damage you're going to take on Crackback. Like there's a lot going on there with the Wither mechanic that Infect has. So I think it's hard for me to justify ever really putting it in a deck that doesn't play Infect creatures unless there's like a big trample aspect.
Well, yeah, I guess because like I'm thinking that like for the most part, the idea of it needing trample, yeah, I guess like it's tough because there's just so many like windows where like it'll have like its text will do different things in different scenarios, and I'm just thinking it's like, oh, this card being like, okay, if I'm proactive and my opponent's trying to respond and like clear the table, I have this uncounterable, unreactable, way to stymie their removal spell. But then also, if I'm racing, I can just attack and Doomblade you, right? Because I just on the attack it will Flame Tongue something, and it's going to stick because they can't remove it in response, right? So like you have the freedom to always know that it's going to do the thing because you can't get caught by like trying to extend.
Yeah,
right?
I think actually that's funny because while you're talking about that, I was like, but like then it's a dead card against a deck like Miracles per se, right? And I'm like, oh no, it's not, because I'm like blanking your removal. So there's
not only that, but like we're looking at the metagame, and that kind of deck is nowhere to be found.
I mean, I'm just saying a deck that would like you'll be in a situation where a deck that this card is dead against is like Doomsday, right? Like it only affects what's on the board, and Doomsday ain't working that way, right? Like Doomsday isn't blocking my Murktide Regent. Doomsday doesn't try and kill my Murktide Regent. All I'm doing is untapping my Murktide Regent for some reason, right? Like in a best case scenario, I'm untapping my creature for some reason, and I can't think of a utility against a combo deck like Storm or Doomsday, or even I guess Cephalid Breakfast runs Swords Plowshare, so there's that. But it's against the decks that don't interact with you at all that this card's kind of worthless. And not in a way, where you always have to kind of worry, right, with Infect, because you are all in on that plan. Where if you're a Delver deck and you're playing Force of Wills, you're playing Dazes and whatnot, and you're putting pressure on your opponent, I just don't see a scenario where this is better than any of the other cards in the deck, including like just another threat, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that like there is the risk of like, okay, yeah, you may have a dead card in a matchup, but like, is it like the majority of matchups like it's the fringe case, right? Like, okay, yes, it's not not every card is going to be great against every deck, but like, I mean, I feel like at the same time, in those fringe scenarios, like the overwhelming impact that it could have on what you're going to run into, right? Like you're running into Delver, you're going to run into like the other creature decks, and to have like a way to like to punch through all that shit. If we're like, it reminds me very much of do you remember back when people were playing Tarmogoyf and a way to like beat the Tarmogoyf mirrors was to play Noble Hierarch?
Yeah, or Fork Bolt or something like that. Yeah, of course.
Because you'd be like, I'm just going to attack through and have like the slightly bigger Tarmogoyf, and that's how I'm going to win this race.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, it makes me think that it's like sort of in that space, right? It's like, yeah, that's not going to be good against, the fast combo decks, but in the matchups where you're expecting like, the gentleman's agreement of like, yeah, we're going to be playing creatures when, it's like, in the ideal world where we had a stockfish for Magic and we just determined what the most powerful deck is, it's undoubtedly Dark Ritual, right? Yeah. Like, but like that's not what we're going to be running into at Eternal Weekend. Now, I think it's like, I think Legalist's Quick Reflexes is probably like, granted we don't know what's going to come out in Caverns, but I think that Legalist's Quick Reflexes is like the card that obviously that's good in Infect, but that's like the card that we should sort of look to experiment in other places, because it seems like it's powerful enough for that leading into Eternal Weekend. And if somebody can figure that out, and then it's like a really powerful mirror breaker, because even if you want to prepare for it, right? Even if you like are like, hey, I am not going to die to Legacy. How are you supposed to fucking combat it? It has split second. What are you supposed to do? Like the only counter is exactly the only counter to a split second is exactly trigger on the stack, flip counterbalance. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's it. Counterbalance, and you can't even set it up. So you have to just
can't set it up.
You have to have ones on top of your deck.
And I know that all the Miracles players out there at some point in their lives have probably felt the dopamine hit of hitting a 3 when somebody tries to Crows and Grip.
Yeah.
Like we've all seen somebody flip their Monastery Mentor to their opponent's Crows and Grip and like get hard, right? Like that's happened, and that feels great. But like at the same time, like that's not a thing that was trying to kill you, right? Or trying to stop your removal spell. It was like something that was trying to like stop you from having the narrative of the game, because they were trying to remove your counterbalance. So it's like it's just like a whole different world. It's a whole different ballgame. And I think that like that's the card that I'm curious. Like, hey man, Legolas's Quick Reflexes is getting me interested in testing Infect for a big event. So like if we're there, we're there.
Think about that. Well, I think that's a good place to call it. This is just really a meditation on where your head should be at for Eternal Weekend coming up. It's the middle of December, right? December 7th. We're in the middle of October. You should have your deck pretty well in mind at this point and be ready to pivot if you need to. But I think giving yourself 2 months to test, putting in that work, I think you have a better chance than most to do well in the tournament.
Yeah, I want to do the one broad aspect that I think we can, pretty much confirm is the world that we're going to be in as we get to Eternal Weekend, and the kind of decks that are going to be viable is all of the top decks in some capacity are playing discard. Grixis Delver is playing some number of Thoughtseize I've seen in their main decks, right? Like my good buddy Jake Saraceno just won a 1K at Game Storia. He was playing 2 Thoughtseize in his Grixis Delver deck, right? Like it is not uncommon. All the Grief scam decks, they're playing a lot of discard. Doomsday plays discard. Black Saga Storm, people are still on that, play a lot of discard. Like Black is heavily represented, and Thoughtseize and Grief are very common plays that you're going to interact with early in the games. And in those environments, you cannot be reactive, because if you are reactive, they will pick it apart.
Yeah. Ley Line of Sanctity, guys, get them while they're hot.
like when people are on like it's like, oh, if the answers are Spell Pierce and Pyroblast and like more force effects, like okay, now you can play a reactive because you can jockey for position. Discard spells are going to force it down your throat. You cannot sit back and like try and play reactive when your opponent is just going to be able to like see the reaction, pick it apart, and then play around it. Like you will not win those positions. So like if you anticipate going and playing at Eternal Weekend, think about how your deck is playing through discard, because you will encounter that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that does it for us, everyone. Have a good one. Check you later. Hey, if you have the means, please support us on patreon.com. Here's that interview with Fenris Cloud. We were talking about Infect.